All right, now we're going to take our deep dive into we're in our grief and gratitude series. And I feel like for you, there's so many ways you could go with this. As your friend, I'm very curious to see which avenue you've decided to take. Describe for us a time of grief.
Oh, well, like you said, I kind of, when I initially, you said that's what it was about, the episode, I'm like, oh, geez, I don't have anything to talk about on this.
Yeah, you
Then
do.
I realized I really have a lot to talk about. So I'm no stranger to grief because I lost my brother before he was 40, and he left behind a young family, and that was very
Oh my
hard. My
gosh.
father passed, but his was more of old age, but I still missed him. And then I even in my early days had an unwanted divorce, and it crushed me, and I felt like a lot of grief from that not turning out as I had hoped and wished it would.
Yes.
And so grief is something I think we experience along our journey of life in many ways. But the grief that caused me the most anxiety, sorrow, regret, and I'll probably tear up,
That's
is the
fine.
grief that was self-inflicted. I mean, there's grief that can
Ooh,
be put upon you, or that can be a result of loss. But the grief that I found I struggled the most in life with is the grief that I brought upon myself. And let me give you an
wow. Yes.
example of that. Is in my 20s, and really probably even into my early 30s, I made some pretty poor choices. And those choices resulted in me getting an STD,
Okay.
sexually transmitted disease, for those that don't know. And in my
Right.
case, it was herpes. And that led to a great deal of sadness, regret, and shame. And then
Right.
that shame, I felt influenced my relationships. It caused me to feel unworthy, unlovable, and quite lonely for years because I didn't want to have to tell someone. I didn't want to
Right.
dating. I was mad at myself that I enabled this to happen.
Right.
And so it kept nagging at me and became, a grief that I was struggling with.
Right.
Um, then I got to a kind of a breaking point, the loneliness was taking over. And I just cried out to God because I've been a Christian since the sixth grade.
Yeah.
I've always had my faith. I haven't always been grounded in that faith, but I knew that God existed and that I needed to reach out to Him in order to have something change.
Right.
But I wasn't able on my own to do that. And so I prayed about it, and He brought to mind Psalm 103:10. Psalm
Wow.
103:10. And for those that don't know that psalm, it says, He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities.
Oh, wow.
Like it bears repeating. He does not treat us as our sins deserve, though we and our culture we live in do. And He doesn't repay us. He doesn't feel like there has to be retribution for us.
Right.
And so He showed me through that psalm that He doesn't treat my sin as I deserve, and He doesn't hold it against me, and that Jesus paid the ultimate price on the cross to redeem me from that past.
Right.
And if I accept it, it provides a way to embrace the future, my future based on a relationship with Him. And so I started to realize I needed to let Him define me, not the culture we lived in that held this so against me, or the men I might date that held this against me. Those things that kept perpetuating where I was at.
Right.
And so once I embraced that and turned my life more fully over to Jesus, my veil of shame and guilt was lifted. I mean, I still had the consequences. I still had the
Right.
consequences of my choices, but I began to feel like I could be loved, like
Oh
I
my
had worth
gosh.
and the confidence to move forward as myself and not keep that grief and shame having that keep me in a stuck place.
Right, right.
So that was huge.
That is huge. And I really understand, and you've really explained it so well, sort of the whole cycle of what you went through, starting out just kind of doing your own thing and having some fun and
You
having
bet.
too much fun and having worldly fun and then then this became kind of like I think you even said it, the breaking point of, getting an STD and then all that now goes with that.
Yeah.
And that sort of, it stopped you in your tracks. And then,
Mhm.
but now, in addition to the physical ramifications, now because you believe in God, you've now taken on like what must he think of me and all these, like you said, very shame-based kind of things, unworthy and lovable. But then that you realize, and I love this, you realize that was not from God.
Yeah.
It's not from him. He would never want you to be in a place of feeling like you're unlovable, you're unworthy. I mean, all of those things. I
Mm-mm.
mean, I feel teary just saying that. That's not who he is. And
Mm-mm. He loves us, and he loves us so deeply that he put his own life on the line to make sure that we knew that,
right,
and
exactly.
that it made a difference.
Right.
If we don't accept it, then it doesn't seem like it makes a difference.
Right. And
So we
that's
have to thank him.
I feel like for myself, I often go back after I've put something down, I go back and
Mhm.
pick it back up. Let me worry about this a little bit. Let me obsess about this a little bit. Oh, you want that? Oh, okay. Oh, now I'm gonna pick it back up again. Oh my
Oh
God.
yeah, I spent many a years doing that, thinking I'd set it aside, pick it back up. But for some reason, just being able to say this psalm to myself and realize the gravity of what he did on the cross, and really allowing that to seep into my soul allowed me to separate from the hold that had on me.
Right, right. You were able to recognize the truth of it, the
Hmm.
truth
Yes.
of it. It got in there, and that is just so beautiful, so beautiful. So we know how you got through it. You tried to do it yourself, and you realized, I can't do that. And this one verse just really hit you, and that's one thing I really love, about reading verses is sometimes at different points in your life, one, it will just like knock you over the head and you'll just think, well, has that been there all along? I don't know.
Exactly. You see it differently.
Was that there before? I mean, it's almost that kind of a feeling. Now, are you able, what would you say is the good that came from that? Because I love Romans 8:28. That's my, for we know that God causes all things to work for good to those who believe him and those who are called according to his purpose. What's can you trace the goodness that came from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because in the moment I didn't feel good about it for
No.
sure. But what came out of that, or what I learned, was that we all make mistakes. We all have things that we aren't proud of or have not done well, or falls in the quote sin category. But I found that if I was willing to tell my story of struggle and redemption, that it could help others to find hope and freedom. And so as I processed this out a bit over the ensuing years, and had opportunity to encounter different individuals who maybe were struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Some might say they were struggling with the same thing if I knew them intimately. I mean,
Right,
very few
right.
people will talk about this topic. So
Yes.
it's one that you don't come across too much. But a quote that really has helped me is, I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw this quote by Brian Solis. Don't even really know him, but this quote was there. And it said, "One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you're going through now, and it will become part of someone else's survival guide."
Uh,
I just resonated with that. And I thought, I need to be able to
Oh
think
my
about my
gosh.
story and share it in a way that can help someone. And let me give you an example. A situation that happened a few years ago here.
Yeah.
As you know, my daughter's older now. But her first year in college, because my daughter knows this about me,
Right.
she encountered an acquaintance at college that actually had just heard she had an
Oh,
STD.
yes.
And she was on the cliff of despair. And she was like, how can I live with this? And what guy's ever going to want to date me? And all the things that I definitely processed. And my daughter immediately called me because she asked the girl, hey, is it okay if I, put you in contact with my mom? And she called me and said, will you talk to this girl and tell her your story? Because she thinks her life is over. And
Oh,
I talked to her for a while that day and really had a
oh,
conversation that I think was healthy. It wasn't like me being a parent trying to dictate what she should do. It was more,
right, right,
I'm a person who survived this, and here's what you need to think about going forward.
right.
And I realized that on that day, I became part of her survival guide, and
Oh,
God made himself known to her through my story. And
right.
she might not have encountered that from in the way that I had it from someone else, because I had the
Yes.
maturity to use it as a guide for her to consider what she's doing going forward and what she needs to do to respond to this. And it was quite an amazing thing. I mean, she was just an acquaintance, so there's not this lasting relationship that we all have, but it was just a time where God used it in a way I think that made a difference.
Oh, absolutely. He's sure.
And so to me, that's a good thing. One thing I will share with you and would want your listeners to know is I've learned if we don't think about these things in advance, it doesn't usually come out very good. So, in other words, if I would have just got on the phone and poured out all my past history, my details, my feelings, my drama, that probably would not have helped her. But the
Right.
fact that I had some time, actually years, to reflect on how might I use this grief, pain, regret in a way that could serve someone else, uh, enabled me to get it down to 5 minutes.
Oh my
Or,
gosh.
or I don't know how much I'd spent sharing with you on the beginning of this topic. But I found if I could get it down to 5 minutes, I could have more opportunity to, one, share it effectively, and secondly, be able to be present and listening to them.
Right.
Because if it's all about me and my story, then it's no longer about them and why they need to even hear it. And
Gosh.
so I feel like there needs to be that. And so,
Well,
as you know, that's really what I crafted my book around that I just now finished.
well, and I'm so glad you brought that up because if you didn't bring it up, I certainly was going to bring it up. And that is that Marianne, throughout her career of being a presentation coach, you're coaching other people give their presentations. Am I wording that well?
Yes, for industry, for 20
For
years in
industry, yes,
industry,
in the
I would
industry,
help executives with their presentations and how to craft their story from a
right?
business perspective.
Right. And don't you find that fascinating that that was your career? And now she's done this beautiful pivot and she's turned all of that experience and, married it to her faith. And now you've taken all of that and you've crafted a book. I'm going to say crafted. I mean, yes, you wrote it. Of course, you wrote it, but it's more than just writing. I think when you craft something, there's art involved. It's infused with inspiration and all those good things that are sprinkled in. So you were able to put all that together, and your book is called, tell me the name of your book.
Your story for God's glory, a Christian's guide to sharing your faith with confidence, clarity, and impact.
Right. And
And
yes, beautiful. And I did not have you on so that we could quote unquote pitch the book, but and no, but what a wonderful, I've got the but in there again. What a wonderful opportunity for us to have a conversation about this because look how applicable this is. You were able to, because of your experience and your faith, those married together, craft this story that now helps other people.
Yeah, God's put on my heart to not only share my own story and help him be known and loved more as a result of it, but to help other people tell their stories. And so the book's been in progress for 5 years, and the gift that the Lord really provided me with is there. It represents 30 different types of people. When I say types, I mean, from a 13-year-old to a grandpa, from a gangster to an executive. I mean, I
Right.
just have stories of different types of people that want to share their story in a more concise and compelling way so that they can help others. And so that's
Yes.
really what it's about, is how do we help take that, what could be our big, complex, messy story of life and distill it down to something that can be shared pretty quickly, but with meaning and purpose.
Yes, yes. And that's exactly, you talked about the different variety of people that you have, and some of them are maybe in a more professional capacity, but that's not really the point. The point is, like you say, to get down, the part of their story that could be helpful to somebody else. And interwoven within that, the faith of how God worked in their life, in their story.
Yeah, yeah, because actually there's 10 primary stories and only two of them are people that would be considered executive types. The others are just your everyday person like ourselves.
Right. And they wanted to be able to do this. I remember the grandpa wanted to be able to do it so that he could share with his grandkids. Isn't that
Right.
correct?
That is
Yes.
correct. Yeah.
Yes. And then the guy who had been in prison wanted to be able to do it for those that came up after him that they might choose better. I mean, not just
Yeah, he was trying to
fellow person.
he was trying to help teenagers who were being recruited into gangs to not go into the gangs.
Right. Oh my gosh. I mean, the impact is it's so vast and mind-boggling and such a beautiful way to bring story out in the most helpful way. And we are so drawn to story,
Mhm.
right?
We do. We are, and as the disciples asked Jesus, why do you tell stories? And he says, well, because if there's no if people are not receptive, they will not be able to move forward. And so a story helps people become more receptive to new perspectives and ideas and things that maybe they aren't familiar with.
Right.
Yeah.
Gosh,
And I
so
just,
true.
one of the foundational pieces of the book is that God first loved us, and our willingness to share what he has done through us in our stories with others is a gift back to him, which is really
Uh,
gratitude in action, if you think.
yes. Yes. Yeah. And I was just going to ask you, what advice would you give for somebody to cultivate gratitude? And it sounds like, what would you say?
Like I was saying, just being willing to take what you just journeyed through and be able to selectively share it with those that God puts on your path that could benefit from that. And it might be one person in your lifetime. It might be five. It might be, most of us are talking to individuals, not
Right.
to groups.
Yes.
But I think just that willingness to say, this sorrow, pain, regret, whatever it is that the person experienced from grief can be turned into something more positive, which then leads to our feeling like we're doing something with purpose, which I feel like is a form of gratitude.
Yes.
I'm being grateful for what you've put in my hand, and I'm going to use it with an open hand to give someone else.
Oh my gosh. So beautiful.
And
Gosh.
you know,
Oh my
I
gosh.
think everyone has a story that matters to someone,
Yes.
that
Yes. Say
someone
that
can hear
again.
from your voice. I like to think about it like the gang leader talking to those youth that are being recruited into gangs. If I walked in, this mommy person and talked to them, they'd be like, so what? But, this, 20-year veteran gang leader walking in and everyone quiets down because they know who he is. that's a whole different story. They're going to hear his story differently than they would if they heard it from me. And I think that's true of all of us, us talking to family members or talking to those in our community.
Absolutely. Here, here. I feel so, after having this conversation, I feel so elevated and so fulfilled
Oh, good.
and
Thank
so
you.
joyous and just all those really good things that are fun to feel. And I'm not going to lie, this morning was kind of rough. I don't know why exactly. It started out with some technical difficulties, and that just wasn't getting resolved. And it led me down this rabbit hole of feeling just and discouraged. And now I get on the call with you and I could fly. I love it. Okay,
Yay.
well, one, is there anything else you didn't get to say that you wanted to say?
I just want to reiterate, your story matters. Our
Yep,
story matters, and it can make a difference for someone in a positive way. And we should embrace that, or we have the opportunity to embrace it. Shouldn't be any shoulds, but we have an opportunity to embrace that and use it for good.
right. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, and the shoulds. Yeah, I'm trying to be careful with the shoulds, but sometimes
They
sometimes
sneak
they
in.
work, sometimes they do. And where can everyone find you?
At Marianne at kingdompresenters.com. So presenters with an S.com, kingdompresenters.com, or Amazon. Look up the book, Your Story for God's Glory by Ann Mariani.
Right. Okay. And I'll have that in the show notes. And Marianne, those are two words, Mary and Ann without an E.
Ann, no E.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there you go. Very good. This has been delightful. That's been
Oh,
my word lately. Yeah,
what a fun word.
it is a fun word because wouldn't it mean of the light? I mean, if it's got the word light in it, D, I mean, of the light, of the light. I
Mhm.
don't know. I'll have to look up the
Okay, you're
word again.
stretching it too far now, Rechelle.
I do like words. I do like words.
You do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marianne. What a pleasure this has been. An absolute honor to have one of my friends on and to be able to talk about all this goodness and to encourage others that, yeah, you do have a story and it does matter. It absolutely does. Thank you,
Thank
Marianne.
you. My pleasure.